My pot roast with Worcestershire sauce recipe is easy and delicious. If you're looking for a way to really bring out the beefy flavor, this is one you're going to want to try. Let's go over the ingredients. You are going to need a chuck roast, 2 to 3 pounds minus 2.5, along with a few tablespoons of oil to brown it. 3 to 4 pounds of vegetables. I'm using 3.5. I have white potatoes, a carrot, celery, red onion, and yellow onion. You can add in red potatoes, sweet potatoes, yellow potatoes, whatever you have. 1 cup of red wine, a 1/4 cup of the Star Worcestershire sauce, 2 to 3 cups of vegetable stock, 2 small bay leaves, a 1/2 teaspoon each of garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper, and 1 packet of onion soup mix. Although you don't have to brown the recipe, I highly recommend doing so because it's going to really bring out the flavor. So I have my 9x13 casserole dish over here buttered. You can use a crock pot or Instant Pot, whatever you want, but I'm gonna make mine in the oven. But before I put the roast in there, I'm gonna turn on the heat and brown it. And now that the oil is hot, I'm gonna go on ahead and add my chuck roast. After cooking on medium-high heat, gas mark 4 out of 6 for 7 minutes on this side and 5 on the bottom side now, I am done browning my roast. So I am going to just very carefully move it over to the buttered 9x13 baking dish. There we go. And while the oil is still hot, you can see there are some brown bits there. I'm going to deglaze the pan with my 1 cup of red wine. So this is just to pick up those little bits that have a lot of flavor because they're browned. And now I am also going to add the 1 packet of onion soup mix. You don't have to do it now, but I'm just going to do it now so that they have time to hydrate the little flakes of onion. Stir this in and then set it off to the side and start assembling the vegetables and the rest of the roast. Now with the brown roast in the center of the pan, I'm just going to place in the vegetables. I chopped the potatoes into chunks that are maybe 1 to 2 inches thick. I'm going to place those around the roast like so. Pieces of celery. I really like how celery tastes in roast like this, so if you've never added it before, I highly recommend that you give it a try. Now for the onion and the carrot, I actually kind of running out of room, as you can see, so I might not add the yellow onion. I think I'll go ahead and add 1/2 of this yellow onion. So depending on how big your roast is, you might be able to add more or fewer vegetables. Just keep that in mind. The potatoes are going to start to oxidize pretty soon. So I'm going to take the red wine that I used to deglaze the pan. I'm just going to pour that over the roast itself and the potatoes. It's going to help a lot. While I'm doing this, I'm going to preheat my oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Before I add the Worcestershire sauce, I'm going to add in the 2 small bay leaves. I have homemade vegetable stock with bay leaf, so this honestly isn't necessary, but if you're using store-bought, I would definitely add a couple bay leaves because they're going to add a ton of flavor. Now for the spices, like I said, half a teaspoon each of garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper. I'm not going to add any salt because I think the Worcestershire sauce is going to have enough salt. The vegetable stock, like I said, is homemade and it doesn't have any salt in it. So just be sure that if you are using store-bought vegetable stock, that you do not get one that has a lot of salt, because otherwise this is probably going to be too salty. Okay, now for the Worcestershire sauce, pour that over the meat, 1/4 cup for the vegetables. And now for the vegetable stock. Like I said, this is homemade vegetable stock made by boiling garlic, onion, celery, and carrot together along with bay leaves for 2 hours, simmering for 2 hours. It's full of flavor. It's going to add a lot of moisture as well. It's going to be delicious. So I'm adding in enough liquid so that most of the roast and vegetables are covered in liquid, but not all the way. Usually that's about 2 cups. I actually ended up adding 2.5 cups of vegetable stock, and like I said, it's going to vary based on how everything is situated in the pan. Really, you just want everything to be mostly covered, but not totally covered, because in that way the top of the vegetables will get crispy, but the inside of especially the potatoes will be nice and fluffy. Now I'm just going to cover this with foil, and I'm going to bake it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit covered for 2 hours. Then I am going to take off the top and continue baking at 350 for 40 minutes so that some of the liquid can evaporate, and then I'm going to turn off the oven and let it sit for 20 minutes. So in total, it's going to be in the oven for 3 hours. My pot roast with Worcestershire sauce cooked in the oven covered at 350 Fahrenheit for 2 hours. Now I'm just basting the meat and the vegetables. And now I am going to put the pan back into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit still, but this time uncovered for 40 minutes to boil off some of the liquid and concentrate the flavors, crisp up the tops of the vegetables, and then I'm going to turn off the oven and let it sit in the oven with the oven off for 20 minutes to finish cooking and also to cool down a bit so that it's not too hot to handle. My pot roast with Worcestershire sauce recipe is now done. Like I said earlier, it was in at 350 degrees covered for 2 hours. Then I took it out, basted it, then put it back in uncovered, still at 350 for 40 minutes. And I turned off the oven, let it sit for 20. Now it's time to eat. Even though it did take 3 hours of cooking time in the oven, it was definitely needed because chuck roast has a lot of tissue that needs to be broken down in order to make it nice and soft. And all the prep work and time baking in the oven was definitely worth it because my pot roast with Worcestershire sauce recipe was a big success. As you can see here, the meat was super tender and really flavorful. The fat melted into the meat, adding flavor, and all the spices and other ingredients in the flavorful broth made it even more so. And as you can see, the meat was fall apart soft and tender. So like I said, 3 hours in the oven is a long time, but it's definitely worth the wait. And in regards to the vegetables, they were cooked exactly how I wanted them to, because they boiled in the broth for the first 2 hours. They were cooked all the way through and soft and fluffy on the inside, but because they had a little bit of exposure to that dry heat of the oven at the end, when I took off the foil, the pieces of potato that were sticking up out of the broth got nice and crispy on top. The texture of the potatoes was really different from basically any other type of baked root vegetable that I've ever had. I think the best way to describe it would be, like I said, they were soft on the inside but crispy on the outside. So I highly recommend that when you make this recipe, you make sure you add some baking potatoes because they are definitely one of the best parts of this recipe. And here you can see I'm spooning some of that broth over the meat and vegetables. This was possibly the most flavorful part of the dish. As everything cooked together, that broth reduced down, concentrating the flavors, and I honestly didn't even think about making gravy because just pouring over that juice was enough for me. Here you can see I've served it with white rice. Although you could just eat the vegetables that are baked in the casserole dish, I highly recommend serving this pot roast with Worcestershire sauce, with rice, bread, or maybe even polenta to help soak up that extra juice. One thing that I do want to point out is that I'm usually not crazy about celery, but for some reason when I make oven roast like this, I really like the flavor and texture of celery. So along with the baking potato, that's another vegetable I would make sure to include. Like I said, I was really pleased with how my pot roast with Worcestershire sauce recipe turned out. I actually already have this recipe here on my channel, but I needed to do it again because it was just so delicious. Even though it does take some patience, it's definitely worth it. It would be a great meal on a cold winter night. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.